So I did a poll on Instagram asking if you guys would rather see my pregnancy story or my everyday makeup look, and the majority of you wanted to hear my pregnancy story, so here we are. I'm going to tell you from before I found out, like just before I found out, to the moment I found out, a little bit of my journey throughout my pregnancy, and then my labor and delivery. So rewind back to October 2018, and I was driving one day. I was having a nice coffee, and I remember feeling weird, and just I had the cold sweats. Like I was sweating, and I had the heat on in the car, but I was sweating, and I knew something was off, but I said, oh, I'm just, the caffeine is making me anxious, I guess. And I'm the type of person that I pee like 3 times a day. So I started noticing that I was peeing like every 15 minutes. It was getting like out of hand. And I had this pressure, what it felt like in my bladder. And I said to my mom, like, something's seriously wrong. Like, I can't stop peeing, and I have this, that pain you get in your bladder when you have to pee so bad and you've been holding it forever. And like your bladder's about to explode out of your stomach. Like, that's what it felt like, but it felt like that constantly. So I was telling my mom I was stressed out, like I knew something was wrong, and she said, well, why don't you make a doctor's appointment and go see what's going on? So that's what I did. I also was breaking out really bad, and I was on a certain type of birth control that actually helped with acne, and I've been on it for years because my skin can get pretty bad. So I noticed, like, after I stopped taking my birth control, my face was like, it was bad, but it progressively kept getting worse, and it was to the point where I had cysts on my chin and my back, and like my face, my forehead even, like it was pretty bad. So I went to the doctor and I explained all this to her, and she told me, why don't you see a dermatologist for your face, but you should take a pregnancy test. And I was like, why? And she's like, because that's like one of the early signs. That's like one of the first symptoms of pregnancy, is that you break out a lot. But I chalked it up to be that I've been on this birth control for the last 10 years, and I've never, like, my body was trying to adjust to not being on it. Like, my hormones were all out of whack, I guess. So I go to the dermatologist, and they do a consultation on me, and then they book me in for a chemical peel. And the words that the doctor said just kept sticking in my brain. Get a pregnancy test, get a pregnancy test. So I went and got a pregnancy test, and this was 2 days before I was scheduled to have my period. I went home, I took the test. I was anxious and nervous. I was hoping it would be positive, but very skeptical and thinking it was going to come out negative, and like just all those emotions, of course, that you have when taking a pregnancy test. And I took it and I put it face down on my bathroom counter, because I couldn't just sit there and look at it the whole time waiting for it to pop up, whether it said pregnant or not pregnant. And washed my hands and waited for a few minutes, impatiently waited for a few minutes, and then flipped it over and it said pregnant. And I had the digital one, so it said pregnant and then 2 to 3 weeks or whatever underneath it. And I was so shocked. Not shocked, like I was just in so much disbelief that this actually said pregnant right now. Like, I was literally in my bathroom like this, like, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god. And I kept, like, for 10 minutes, just kept repeating, oh my god. Then I go to tell Shane, my boyfriend. He was actually away working at the time, and I tried to video chat him. He wasn't scheduled to be home for 4 weeks, and there was no way in hell I was waiting 4 weeks to tell him that I was pregnant, because I really wanted to do it in person. He's at sea, so he couldn't answer me, and I ended up having to tell him in a message, but you know, it is what it is. We're both just trying to process the whole thing, you know. So then I had to tell my parents, because we were living with our parents at the time because we were trying to buy a house. We were saving to buy a house, and I had to tell them because it was so early and I was already getting symptoms, so I was scared that I would end up getting morning sickness and not be able to hide it, and they were super excited. Yeah, so then fast forward through my pregnancy, I did not have any morning sickness. I never threw up once. The only thing that I can truly say is that I had absolutely no energy. So I was constantly exhausted. All I wanted to do was sleep, and it was to the point where it scared my mom sometimes, because she would come in to wake me up and not be able to wake me up. Like, she would have to forcefully wake me up out of my sleep. I was so tired, and that's the the biggest symptom I had. So I'm terrified of throwing up, so I'm blessed that I did not have morning sickness or anything of the sort. So throughout my pregnancy, I served in a restaurant, and towards the second and third, like the end of the second into the third trimester, I was finding it getting harder and harder. I mean, it's a very demanding job. It's a lot of labor work and carrying, you know, heavy plates back and forth from the kitchen to tables, and running around when you're busy on your feet for hours without any break. You don't get a scheduled break to eat or to relax or anything like that. So I wasn't eating when I probably should have been eating, and it was hard on my body. Like, you don't only have to serve tables, you also have to clean and stock, you know, bring out kegs of beer and stuff. It's a lot. It's a lot of work on a normal person, let alone somebody pregnant. So I started to find it hard. I started to swell, my feet started to swell, my back hurt. It was exhausting. So, but I had everybody in my ear telling me that, oh, there's people who work up until they give birth, and you know, there's people on their feet 8 hours a day who are pregnant, like, you know, 9 months pregnant, and you have a baby coming, you need to save, you need to get your hours for maternity, which I had like multiple times over. So, you know, I just, my body was telling me one thing and everybody else was telling me another thing, and I regret it now. I didn't listen to my body when I should have. But it was April 27th. I was 32 weeks pregnant. I'd come home from work one night and went to Shane's parents' house, and we were sitting down, and my back was killing me, and of course I chalked it up to be I was working, so of course I'm in pain. I'm carrying a baby while I'm running around for hours on end. But I told Shane I had to go to bed, like I was in pain. So I went in to the bathroom, because you know when you're pregnant you pee like 100 times overnight. So of course I peed before I got in bed, and I pulled down my pajamas and there was blood. Obviously scared me, freaked me out. I ran back out to Shane. I told him we had to go to the hospital. I was bleeding. He rushed me there. He was all panicked, and we headed to the hospital. Emergency lights on, going through red lights, passing cop cars, like so we get to the hospital. I go into the case room. They put the monitors on me. I'm having contractions, or, you know, Braxton Hicks or whatever. And I was scared. I thought I was in labor, and they hooked me up to an IV and stuff like that. Monitored me overnight, and then kept me in the hospital for a few days. And once the bleeding stopped, they kind of just sent me home and told me to take it easy. So kind of like bed rest, I guess. And I didn't go back to work until I was able to see my OBGYN. So I went back to my doctor. She took me off work, mainly because I was scared of, you know, what was going on and putting so much stress on my body again for the remainder of my pregnancy. So she took me off, and what they had found was my placenta was low-lying. So if your placenta covers your cervix, it's called placenta previa, and I was kind of on the verge of that. And then about a week later, I was again sitting at Shane's parents, and we were actually just talking about how I was going to go get a shower and get ready to go talk to my boss and tell him that I was going to come back to work, even just for a couple of shifts a week, just until the baby's born, because I mean, I was fine. I didn't have any more bleeding, and I thought I could do it. So as I'm talking about going to shower and get ready, I feel this gush, and I just kind of stop, and I'm like looking down, and Shane and his mom knew that there was something wrong, so they were like, "What, did your water break?" So I was like, something broke. I got up off the chair, and the chair, there was blood on it. I went into the bathroom, and this time it was like to an extreme. It was the floor was covered in blood, the toilet was covered in blood, the lower half of my body was covered in blood, my socks were red, covered in blood. Like, I had a trail of blood going through his parents' house. His mom was going behind me cleaning up all of my trail of blood through the house. She was picking up blood clots everywhere. Like, anyway, I had to put on an adult diaper, and off we go to the hospital again. So we get there, I'm back in the case room. You know, they put you in a gown, so I took off my pajama pants and the diaper, and instantly blood was just pouring out onto the floor, and I creep into the bed, afraid that like my insides were gonna freaking fall out. The nurse comes in, they hook me up to 2 IVs, one in each hand, and, you know, do an ultrasound to check on the baby. The baby's heart rate was good, the baby looked fine. I go to the case room again for the night, and they're literally, like, I'm lying on a bedpan and on, like, you know, the puppy pee pads that they have, like those big, huge pads that they had to lay those out on the bed. And I was lying on all of that, and they would dump out the bedpan and like change the pad every 10 minutes. That's how much I was bleeding. Like, it was insane. Shane, actually, he told me that it was like somebody turned on a faucet inside of me for 12 hours. Like, that's how long I was bleeding overnight, was 12 hours. And he said it's just like a faucet. Like, you leave water running, that's what it was like. And I was having contractions, and they were really bad. Anyways, turns out it was my uterus reacting to the irritation. So I wasn't having actual contractions, but my uterus was contracting, if that makes sense, to kind of cope with what was going on. So I ended up staying in the hospital. The nurse told me not to expect to go anywhere until the baby was born. And I was like, I have like at least another month. And like, the food sucked. It's so bad. So then they had to do blood work every single day. So every morning they would come in and do my blood work. My arms were bruised all over. My veins were collapsed, and I was just like, I'm so over this. So my blood pressure actually got high, like really high, and like my feet were still swollen. Like, they were literally like Play-Doh. I'm not kidding when I say Shane would sit down and play with my foot, like make dents in my feet and wait and just watch them stay there. Yeah, it was wild. So they gave me pills to bring my blood pressure down, and they weren't working. So my blood pressure was not coming down. So they figured out that my placenta had actually erupted. So scary. Of course I had all these questions, like, is the baby okay? Is he still getting nutrition? Like, is it going to detach and then he's not going to have any supply to anything? And like, what's going to happen? Like, I was freaking out, of course, like you would. So then my doctor came in and said, okay, so considering your blood pressure and this placental abruption, we're going to induce you tomorrow. What? I was like, you can't just come in and drop this bomb on me right now. Like, I'm here by myself. I was freaking, I was shaking. I was so scared. So they gave me 2 shots in my hips for the baby's lungs, because the lungs are the last thing to develop. They're not fully developed until 36 weeks. So they gave me the 2 shots for his lungs, and I had to wait 24 hours. So the next day they induced me. They brought me downstairs to the case room again, and they broke my water. Nothing to that whatsoever. You can't feel anything, and then all of a sudden it's just like a warm trickle. It was totally fine. I didn't mind it at all. And I had actually started contracting myself that morning, oddly enough. I was like having back pain and some cramps. So when they checked me, my cervix went from completely closed to 2 centimeters dilated and 70% effaced on my own. So I was going into labor regardless, I guess. Like, that was the start of it or whatever. So they had to give me an early epidural, like basically give me the epidural right away, like as soon as they broke my water and started me on the Pitocin, because there was a 50-50 chance that I was going to need an emergency C-section, which freaked me out. I so badly wanted to have a vaginal delivery. So the anesthesiologist comes in and he's preparing to give me the epidural, and I'm like holding on to Shane for dear life, and I'm so scared. So he told me it was just going to be like almost like a bee sting. I didn't feel any of it, barely. Like I was just sitting there like bracing myself, and he gave me the needle and he put the epidural in, and then I kind of looked at him and I was like, that was it? Like, is it over? He was like, yeah, you're good now, you can move. I barely even felt that, like, thanks. So the daytime nurses only had my Pitocin on level 1. They were afraid that if they put it up too high, that where the baby was so premature that he wouldn't be able to handle the stress of labor. And I got up to 4 centimeters by 7 p.m. that night. Throughout the day, 2 or 3 times, the baby's heart rate dropped. So the nurse who was in there with me was like hitting the buzzer, and she was yelling out the hallway like, fetal heart rate down. And that was scaring the shit out of me, of course. So all of a sudden I had like 8 nurses in the room and 2 doctors, and they were flipping me side to side to side to side. Like I kept having to turn and turn and turn in the bed to try and get the baby's heart rate back up. So that happened a few times, and the doctor said, 1 more fetal heart rate down and you're in for a C-section, and he's out in 5 minutes. Like, that's it. And I was praying to anybody who would listen, like, please keep my baby safe. I was so worried about everything. Of course, it was very, very stressful. Meanwhile, Shane is lying across the 2 chairs next to me, sleeping during all this. Like, everyone's yelling out that the baby's heart rate is dropping, and he's sleeping. And my mom leans over to him, and she's like, Shane, you better wake up or she's going to kill you. I was like, yeah. Yeah, then my nighttime nurse comes in, and she puts the Pitocin levels up on 13. She's like, we're having this baby tonight. And I was like, okay, it sounds good. So I went from 4 centimeters to ready to push in 3 hours. So then I started to really feel really feel the contractions. Like, they were intense, and I had the epidural. I was like, Shane, keep pressing the button. Like, I'm trying to breathe through the contractions, and she gets the anesthesiologist to come in, and he gives me a shot of a higher dose. So all of a sudden, as soon as I feel that going into my spine, I go completely paralyzed from my waist down. And when I say paralyzed, I mean paralyzed. Like, not just numb, not just pain, go away. I mean paralyzed. Like, you touch my leg, I couldn't feel it. I couldn't move my legs. I couldn't feel a thing. So then I told the nurse that I could feel a little bit of pressure. And I was like, well, I don't know. Like, I kind of just feel pressure everywhere. Like, I feel like if I push, something would come out, but I don't feel it so intensely that I feel like I have to push. Like, I'm not really sure what that's supposed to feel like. So she's like, okay, well, I'm going to have to check you again. She checked me. She was like, oh, yep, you're going to have to push. The baby's head is right there. So then my mom got emotional. Shane actually had to lift my legs up on the stirrups because I could not move. So my mom was there with like a cold cloth on my head. Shane was rubbing my legs even though I couldn't feel it. Shane was rubbing my legs. and just telling me, you know, you got this, you can do it, like totally supportive and a lot better than I actually thought he was going to be. So then I just like grabbed on to the handles on the bed and I started pushing. So 4 pushes and the baby was out. Happened really, really quick. And then I delivered the placenta and the doctor was like, oh yeah, look, there's the abruption. I only had 3 stitches, so that was fabulous. And they laid my son on my chest, and you know, Shane, my mom stepped back and Shane, you know, came over and wrapped his arms around the both of us, and we all cried and it was beautiful. And then he had to go to the NICU. So he's been 2 weeks in the NICU, and funny actually, as I mentioned before, we were trying to buy a house. So our mortgage specialist actually came to the hospital so that we could sign the papers to close the deal on the house that we were purchasing while I was in labor. So everything was thrown at us all in one day. Wouldn't change it for the world. I'm so grateful that it turned out that way. But it was very, very hectic. And yeah, I spent 2 weeks in the NICU with the baby, and then we came home and lived happily ever after. So yeah, that's my pregnancy story. And here is the sweetest boy in the whole world. Excuse me. Over here. Oh, you say hi. Say thanks for watching. Grayson. Pure joy.